What's going on YouTube? This is SG1 Sports and you're watching our college football channel. It's time for my Week 8 Top 25. Yes, we are heading into Week 8 and some big games this past weekend. I think the rankings are starting to become more and more clear. I think the playoff contenders are starting to become more and more clear. So we're starting to get a really good picture of which teams are legit this year. And still some teams it's hard to figure out, but this is my Top 25. We'll start at the bottom. And I've got Tennessee at number 21, Iowa 22, Air Force 23, Florida 24, UCLA 25. So when I looked at the teams and I looked at the rankings, I felt like there were 23 teams that deserve to be ranked. So the cutoff really there at Air Force, and then it was just plugging in those final two teams who should get the 24 and 25 spot, because I don't really think Florida or UCLA necessarily deserve to be ranked, but I think they've done enough. I think they've done more than the teams behind them. And so I've got them ranked. Florida does have a win, an impressive win over Tennessee, a game where they really dominated. I know the loss to Kentucky is bad. They got blown out in that game, but their other loss came to Utah. So really it's just because of that win over Tennessee. And you look at UCLA losing to two top 25 teams in pretty close games, and then also a win over Washington State, which that win doesn't look as good now, but still the Bruins barely making it in there. And if you're wondering, I don't have USC ranked. I do not have USC ranked. I don't think that they deserve to be ranked. When you look at what they've done so far this season, forget Caleb Williams, forget last year, just based off of what we have seen this year, it hasn't been great. You know, you had to go to triple overtime to beat an Arizona team that's not a top 25 team. Didn't look great against Arizona State, allowed Colorado to come back, and then they got really dominated by Notre Dame. So I don't have USC ranked. I mean, Notre Dame's the only good team that they played, and they lost. And again, against mediocre teams, average teams, they have not been impressive. So if you're wondering about USC, I don't have them ranked. We'll see what they do as they get some better opportunities here down the stretch to play some good quality teams, and if they can win some of those games, obviously they'll be right back up in my rankings. But right now, again, I haven't really seen anything that makes me think that they should be a top 25 team this year. Air Force number 23 there. I was waiting on them to beat a pretty good team. Wyoming's a pretty good team. I think we know that. Air Force, I should say, gets the win there, and so I do have them ranked. Again, with these teams that don't really play anybody, I don't really see them moving up beyond, the 20 range, just because they're not going to have the resume unless you just go out and completely dominate. But Iowa 22, because of their defense. Iowa and Utah are really similar when you look at those two teams. Iowa's one loss came to Penn State, who's a top 5 team in my opinion, and their defense really playing well, even without Cade McNamara in there at quarterback. It's all about the defense for Iowa, and they are up to number 22. Tennessee at 21. Impressive win against Texas A&M. I still believe Texas A&M is a pretty good team. Not a top 25 team, obviously, at this point, but that was still a really nice win. So Tennessee, I know the loss to Florida was bad, but if you look at the rest of their season, they've been really solid, and the ball's up to number 21. Now we go to number 20. That's Tulane. I said it last week on, I think, my upset alert video. I said that I really overlooked Tulane. This Tulane team, I probably should have had them in the rankings last week. It's a team that lost a close game to Ole Miss without their starting quarterback. They've been impressive in the rest of their games. So Tulane definitely should be ranked, in my opinion. Duke at number 19, even without Riley Leonard, they showed why they're a top 25 team. It's all about the defense. Really impressive against NC State. Notre Dame, very impressive against USC. But look, Louisville beat them easily. And I know Louisville just lost to Pitt, but I have a hard time ranking Notre Dame ahead of Louisville when Notre Dame has one more loss and Louisville beat them head-to-head in a game that wound up not even being super close. So I have to put Louisville ahead of Notre Dame, just like I have to put Notre Dame ahead of Duke. Head-to-head matters to me unless there is unless you can clearly see that one team is better than another. They have a much better resume, and maybe you think that game was a fluke or whatever. But Louisville just had a bad game against Pitt, and they drop in the rankings. But again, with a win over Notre Dame, an impressive win over Notre Dame, I can't drop them much. I've got them at 17. Missouri at number 16, really impressive win over Kentucky. and again had opportunities to beat LSU, who I have ahead of them. So again, head-to-head really matters to me when these teams are pretty similar. LSU has that head-to-head win over Missouri. You look at their losses; they lost on the road in a close game to Ole Miss, and that tells me they're pretty close to Ole Miss. They should be ranked pretty close to them. And then the other loss, obviously, coming to a top 10 Florida State team. Oregon State, Utah, they're at 13 and 14. Both teams have been pretty impressive. Utah, especially with their defense, as bad as their offense has been this season. At times it's not been terrible, but at times it has been. And then Oregon State continues to just get better and better. So those two teams, you wonder, are they up there with Washington and Oregon, or is there a gap between those teams? And then again, you wonder, where is USC? Look, I don't have them ranked just because of what they've done this season. That doesn't mean I don't think that they could still maybe even win the Pac-12, because I think they have that potential. So I'm not giving up on USC. I don't think their season is over, but I think we've seen a lot more from these teams, Oregon State and Utah, and they've proven they're good quality teams. Ole Miss at number 12, they are 5-1, looking pretty good so far this season. Rebels look like a team that could maybe, I guess the problem for them is going to be the fact that they lost to Alabama. So even if they win out, they would need Alabama to lose 2 games. And so I don't think they really have any shot at making it to the SEC championship. But what if Ole Miss wins out and goes 11-1? Could they maybe sneak into that playoff conversation? They'd have a pretty good resume. So, watch out for Ole Miss. It's going to be tough. Schedule obviously going to get tougher, and they have a chance against Georgia. You win that game against Georgia. Georgia's undefeated at that time. I'm telling you, they're going to have a pretty good resume. So if they can string together a couple more wins, we're going to have to start talking about Ole Miss in that playoff conversation. Alabama number 11. They still have some issues. This is not, and I've said this before, this is not one of the great Alabama teams that we've seen in the past. They're not bad. They're not as bad as they looked against Texas or South Florida, but they're still gonna have some struggles at times just because of the passing game. And I know Milroe is getting better, and I know that they're able to hit some deep passes and things, but when it's third and long and you need a big play, do you really expect him to go out there and deliver? I know he has at times, but I just still see some problems there. And the offensive line as well at times not looking great. So this is a really good Alabama team, but again, I just don't think that they are a national championship type team this year. They could still maybe get to the college football playoff though. They're going to be favored in the rest of their games. They get Tennessee and LSU both at home, and then it could come down to a game against Georgia in the SEC championship. So Alabama, really good team. I just don't think they're great. I don't think they're the elite Alabama team that maybe we have seen in the past. And then we go to 6 through 10. North Carolina number 10, really looking impressive right now. I mean, I thought the Miami game might be pretty tough for them, but they went out, and I'm telling you, this North Carolina team is for real, and they might be a real threat to Florida State. Looks more and more like those teams are going to meet in the ACC championship in what should be potentially a really good game, and maybe even a game where the winner gets into the college football playoff. I still kind of think North Carolina is a little bit behind these top 9 teams, but I think they're the top team for that next tier. Yes, I would take North Carolina over Alabama right now if they played. I really would. And on a neutral field, I'd take the Tar Heels. They're playing that good. They got a great quarterback, a defense that has really improved. So the Tar Heels looking great. Oregon, tough loss to Washington in a game where it was just like last year. I thought Oregon was really the better team. A bad decision to go for it on 4th down again cost them. And the Ducks still have everything in front of them. They'll potentially get another shot at Washington, but that's a tough loss. Now there's no room for error for them. And Texas is number 8 and a bye week. Again, let's see what they do now. How do they bounce back from the loss to Oklahoma? Florida State at number 7 took care of business this weekend. Ohio State number 6 also took care of business. Really, maybe their best overall game of the season. And you want to be playing your best, because up next, it's Penn State in the game of the weekend coming up on Saturday. And then my top 5. So I've got Penn State still at number 1, then Michigan, Oklahoma, Washington, and Georgia. And at Georgia, as they continue to just not look all that impressive, and now they've lost Brock Bowers potentially for the season, Georgia to me is actually in that with that next group of teams. With Ohio State and Florida State. I think the top 4 have kind of separated themselves a little bit. I'm not saying these are going to be the 4 teams to make the college football playoff, but right now they look like the 4 best teams. Penn State, again, has been the most consistent team, I feel like, this season, and they've got some pretty decent wins. The Iowa win really looks good now, scoring 31 points, I believe it was, against a really good Iowa defense. Michigan has probably been the most consistent team, but they don't really have the great resume. Oklahoma is right behind those two teams. Maybe not quite as consistent, but they've still been very good, and they've got a very impressive win over Texas. If we're talking about resume between those three teams, Oklahoma might actually be the number one team. And then Washington also with a great resume with their win over Oregon now. So these four teams are very, very close. I would really not argue much if you wanted to move them around. Put Oklahoma at 1, Michigan at 1, Washington at 1. I do not think Georgia deserves to be the number one team in the country, especially after Kentucky just lost to Missouri. That was their big signature win. And so, yeah, Georgia, they've got Florida coming up in a couple of weeks. That, I think, that'll probably be the best team they've played so far. So we'll see how they play in that game, tough rivalry game. And then they're going to still have Ole Miss and Tennessee coming up. So we'll find out about Georgia, but I'm still not convinced that this is a Georgia team that is going to run the table and be that dominant team at the end of the season, playing potentially for a national championship. I'm not convinced. I think they still have that potential, but without Brock Bowers especially, it's going to be tough. So that's my top 25 heading into Week 8. Really, we're going to find out, especially I cannot wait to find out what happens with Ohio State and Penn State, really to find out how good those two teams are. Neither one of them have played any great teams so far, so I think that's going to be a really, really good measuring stick game and a huge, huge game in the Big Ten and also for the college football playoff picture. But how would you rate the teams? Give me your top 25 down in the comments below.